Uh, how can NetScout help the customer to get close? I believe will not to give the answer, but get close the answer of the risk management things in terms of visibility.
Yeah, I mean, there are several ways. We when we get in conversations with our clients, we often talk about, let's talk about your crown jewels, your critical assets. That's the first place we start. Because realistically speaking, if we were to ask an open question, like, what do you want to protect? We know the answer.
Everything.
Yeah.
But we can't, in the world we live in, again, in practical terms, theoretically, that sounds amazing. Okay, right out of college, I would have said, let's do this. But the reality is that it's very hard to do because cost and all, you have to balance all those equations, right? All those variables in the equation. We start with the critical assets. And then we find a mechanism to allow the customers to gain access to what those critical assets are doing so that we can understand the behavior of those critical assets. And then you leverage that particular behavior to understand anything that might be potentially malicious or not. So I often say we're in the identification of suspicious activities game, because we as a security, and no security vendor can definitively always state, oh, this is definitely malicious. The determination of malicious from suspicious, that happens only by the organization. Because I could generate an event, you could generate an event, that same event in organization 1 is a problem, organization number 2 is not a problem. So we start with critical assets, we gain a good understanding of how they behave, and then based on that, we build a defense model, so to speak, to be able to protect those critical assets first. And then, of course, from there, we can branch out to gain visibility to other parts of the world.
I believe that this strategy is something that came from the NetScout history.
Yeah.
So NetScout is a company 40 years in the market, focus on working with packets. So this is the core, where NetScout is able to analyze a huge amount of data and index this providing smart data for the customers. And this is something very difficult to have. So when NetScout acquired Arbor, we gain all those security knowledge feeds and everything, cybersecurity that comes with Arbor. And so we are able to process that amount of data and also apply the mechanisms to help the customers to understand how the network works and what they could considering this is bad or not, or it's a malicious behavior or not. So we become very good at it.
A great example, I'll use an example. I can't name names, but real cases, right? A great example is another large financial organization. Working with them, they have multiple international locations. And when we deployed our network security solution in their environment, the first thing they said was, we don't generally ever use any vulnerable protocols because we have very strict compliance regulations and things like that. So we said, okay, that's fine. We turned it on, and within 24 hours, we saw a huge presence of Telnet, RDP, SMB version 1,
Yeah.
And, we didn't obviously want to make a big deal out of it, but the reaction on the customer's face when they saw that was priceless, because immediately they recognized, oh my God, even after all the stringent compliance standards and everything that they put in place, the reality is there are assets doing those kinds of things and they had no clue about. So they immediately took action right away and closed any particular gaps and holes. But this is just one example of many, right, where visibility plays a very important role. And that's why we work on that quite actively.
The customers are so used to, I have a EDR strategy, I have a microsegmentation strategy, I have next-gen firewalls, I have WAF. They already have a lot of tools because they need it, right? But there is always the gap. There's always the exception. There's always that point. And they don't have visibility. They don't know. So they have a lot of risks and gaps they don't know. So when we start to talking about checking the network or get a platform like an NDR and see the traffic in the network, they start to see exactly what is happening, the exceptions or the gaps. And that is huge because they don't even know they have those risks.
And actually, Fabi, to your point, I just want to say, when I talked about 100%, 180% increase in exploitation of vulnerabilities, that's exactly the reason I said it, because to the red team point you were talking about earlier, the reason why there's so much exploitation of vulnerabilities is because actually the security tools have gotten better. So attackers have to find another way in. And that's what they're doing.
They evolve.
They're evolving. And that's why you have custom malware. You have malware-free activity that's on the rise as well. That's exactly those are the reasons right there.
They get more creative.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's